Okay, good morning, everyone. To get us started then, first with our health and safety announcement, there's no fire alarm drill anticipated today, so if the alarm sounds, please leave the building through the nearest fire exit by following the signs above the doors. Make your way to the rear of the car park and wait there until you're told it is safe to return. And also, please make sure all phones are either muted or switched off. To start the meeting then, good morning everyone and welcome to this Strategic Planning Committee meeting on Monday the 23rd of September 2024. I'm your Chair, Councillor Todd Olive. To my right is Vice Chair, Councillor Mike Howe. Supporting officers present are Ed Freeman, Assistant Director, Planning, Strategy and Development Management, Matt Dickens, Planning Policy Manager, Damien Hunter, Planning Solicitor, and Debbie Meakin, Democratic Services Officer. Can I remind everyone present that this meeting is audio recorded for subsequent publication on the Council's website, so please can members and officers making a contribution to the meeting use a microphone be recorded. we have a new microphone system. There are some slight teething issues, but hopefully that shouldn't happen very much today. We'll now start the meeting then by doing a roll call of committee members and declaration of interests. Debbie.
Thank you, Chair. Can I start with yourself, please? So, yes, if you can give me that you're present and then if you have any declarations to make.
You certainly can. I am, in fact, present, and today I do have a declaration in regard to site Wimple 11. That's an effects and prejudicial NRI, so I will leave the room for that item.
Thank you very much, Chair. Can I move on to Councillor Howe, please?
Yes, thank you. I am here, and I have two. I have an ORI because I sit on the parish council for Clist St Mary, which is Bishop's Clist. Obviously a ward member as well, and I have an effects NRI regarding Clist St Mary, being as I own the village shop as well.
Thank you very much. I'll move on to Councillor Brian Bailey, please. If you can let me know you're present and any declarations.
Yes, I am present. I've got no declarations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Moving to Councillor Jess Bailey. Good morning, Jess.
Good morning, thank you. I'm present and I've got it directly relates NRI in site Otry 09 because I'm a Devon County councillor and that site is owned by Devon County Council. So I will be speaking at the start and then leaving the room when we get to that item. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll move on to Councillor Blakey, please.
Present and no declarations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Moving on to Councillor Colin Brown.
Present and no declarations.
Thank you, Colin. Moving on to Councillor Bethany Collins. Good morning, Bethany.
Morning, present and no declarations.
Thank you very much. Moving on to Councillor Ollie Davey.
Present, no declarations.
Thank you. And now to Councillor Paula Fernley.
Present and no declarations.
Thank you very much. Moving on to Councillor Hayward, please.
Present and no declarations, thank you.
Thank you. On to Councillor Benningham.
Present, no declarations.
Thank you very much. And who else do I have in the room? Last but by no means least, Councillor Levine. Good morning.
Present and no declarations.
Thank you very much. Oh, and I have a latecomer who I'll just deal with in a moment, Chair, if that's okay.
Of course, thank you, Debbie. We'll have a collection at the end for a watch for Councillor Young. Agenda item 1 then, apologies for absence.
None that I have, unless anyone else has any. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Debbie. Agenda item 2, declarations of interest, we have just done, which brings us then to agenda item 3, public speaking, or general public speaking, I should say. We have 4... Oh, sorry, non-committee members. Thank you, Damien. Councillor Faithful? We can't move these microphones because it's the new system.
Thank you, Chair. Just to declare, I'm on the planning committee, and one of the sites has got an active planning application, Otry. No, it isn't. It's a G. 20,
The one next to Otry
27,
Town.
next to the Solston. I've also had recent correspondence with one of the landowners about a couple of sites, about the final question on each one, if there are more alternatives might be possible.
Okay. Any other non-committee members? Councillor Johns? It's good exercise.
Hi, I'm an Otry St Mary Town Councillor, and obviously we're going to be discussing Otry Parish, so I think it's just an ORI. I don't think any of them affect me directly from where I live. Thank you.
So, Chair, now that Councillor Jeff Young's got settled, Jeff, would you mind announcing that you're here and if you have any declarations? Thank you.
I've got no declarations and I'm here.
Thank you very much. Back to you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Agenda item 3 then, public speaking. We have 4 members of the public registered to speak in general public speaking today. First up, we have Councillor Bob Nelson, Chairman of the Blackdown Hills National Landscape Partnership. And I believe we have a statement from Debbie.
Thank you. Yes, so I'm reading this out on behalf of Mr. Nelson, who can't be with the committee this morning. He says the following: the comments are from Broadhenbury Parish Council on the site selection report, version 1. Broadhenbury Parish Council supports the selection of site BRHE04. This site is currently the subject of planning application 23/2538/OUT, for which our support and comments are on record. It is our understanding that there are no outstanding substantive issues between the EDDC and the applicants, and that the site will be approved in outline shortly. This application will deliver 4 affordable houses which will meet the need identified in our housing needs survey. We do not consider it is therefore necessary to allocate the 2 sites. BRHE 05 and 07, the Parish Council believes that heritage and landscape impacts cannot be overcome. Accordingly, we do not support these sites. BHRE 09, the Parish Council is opposed to the site. Our detailed reasons are contained in a letter to the committee members dated 21st of January. The content of this letter was reaffirmed at a public meeting on the 23rd of September, today. For ease of reference, the members have already had that. And in summary, on that element, there are massive heritage impacts on this site. The redrawing of the built-up area boundary simply to include this site is a cynical attempt to legitimise the site and redefine open countryside. The proposed built-up area boundary follows no natural topographical feature and conveniently departs from the national landscape boundary to include the site, which would then be about the NL hedge boundary. He's also included comments by the Blackdown Hills Parish Network, who state that they have no issue with the proposed service village concept, but would submit that the definition of services is outdated. For example, it would include public EV or cycle charge points. The cumulative number of services required is impractical in cases where a defined service practicality provides more than one service. Secondly, the sustainability criterion, which requires development sites to be close to services, is too rigidly applied. We think that service villages should be allowed to serve the hinterland of hamlets which they support. Reconsideration of these 2 components would allow development of affordable housing in more villages within the Blackdown Hills for those communities which would support it. And lastly, Chair, he includes comments by the Blackdown Hills National Landscape, which states as follows: that the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act of 2023 requires authorities to seek the further purposes of protected landscapes. The primary purpose from the 1949 Act is to conserve and enhance natural beauty. Until this Act, the requirement was to have regard to the purposes of protected landscapes, which is a lower hurdle in law. National planning policies and the guidance notes which support them have not yet been updated. but we would urge the LPA to work formally with the 2 protected landscapes in East Devon to determine how this act might work in practice so that development in protected landscapes complies with the law. So that's from Bob Nelson. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Debbie. We then have Angie Hearn on behalf of Broadcliff Parish Council. Oh, no, we don't. Okay.
Doesn't look like she's present, Chair. Shall we move to the next?
Yes, Councillor Francis Pullman from West Hill Parish Council.
Right, I will test your new microphone system. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak at today's meeting on behalf of West Hill Parish Council. I'll save my comments about the specific West Hill sites for later in the agenda, but I'd like to make some general comments at the moment. Firstly, with regard to green wedges. Now, both the current local plan and the emerging plan support the principle of green wedges. And the neighbourhood plan for Otry, St Mary and West Hill identifies a green wedge between the 2 settlements. We're pleased to see this included in the draft plan for public consultation earlier this year. And I mention this because today the committee will consider sites that are situated within this green wedge. These sites, Otry 1A, 1B and GHED 23, 24 and 26, occupy the northern half of the green wedge, and this would result in the coalescing of the 2 settlements. Now, officers, well, other than Otry 1B, officers haven't recommended these sites for allocation, and our parish council urges the committee to follow this view. It seems that these sites would actually negate the whole principle of green wedges. We are particularly concerned about Otry 1A, which has the potential to deliver over 400 homes. If this was developed, we believe it would seriously harm West Hill. Development on this scale would impact on the facilities and the services based in Otry that are currently shared with West Hill, and this needs to be planned for. But in particular, I want to highlight the impact of maybe up to 800 additional cars on the local roads. If this site is developed, there's going to be a significant increase in the traffic volumes using the B3174 between Otry St Mary and the Daisy Mount A30 junction. Also using this road will be the heavy lorries transporting tons of raised sand and gravel from the Straight Great Quarry. And in addition to this, permission's been granted for the dairy herd to cross the B3174 4 times a day to and from the milking parlour. The time taken for each crossing is stated to be up to 45 minutes and needs to occur at very specific times of the day. We are also aware that there's been approval for the development of a service station at the Daisy Mount junction. So this will mean heavy vehicles and lots of other traffic on that roundabout, which will lead to congestion with all these additional traffic coming from Otry St Mary. Car users and other vehicles will inevitably look for alternative routes, and one of the main alternative routes is going to be to travel via West Hill to avoid these inevitable queues. Our narrow, unlit, unpaved lanes are not suitable for this, and all we see is a significant, very significant downside for West Hill with no benefit whatsoever for the residents. We share the concerns raised by previous speakers in previous meetings about the infrastructure across East Devon. But I want to raise serious concerns specific to West Hill. We've raised these in the recent working group sessions.
Councillor Pullman, could I ask you to wrap up, please? You have had your 3 minutes over.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Lastly, I have Mr. Chris Booker, co-chair of the Oil Mill Lane Residents Association. Just in time, Mr. Booker. Could you turn the microphone on, please, so we can hear you? Thank you.
Right hand button. Okay. My name is Chris Booker. I'm the co-chair of Oil Mill Lane Residents, which includes the land referred to in the agenda from Creeley Farm down to Cliff St George. We sit in the area known as option 3 in the emerging local plan, the land referred to as 3 possible additional strategic land allocations is what I'm here to refer to, and which concerns many of our residents. It's a subset of option 3 proposed by landowners and developers for up to 2,000 new homes. The working group has not recommended these 3 sites, as you will all know, for inclusion in the local plan, and we would strongly support that view. We respect that new homes at some level are needed and have to go somewhere. However, we do not support the use of sites which are not sustainable on economic, social or natural environment grounds, as we believe is the case in these sites. If we look at economics first, 2,000 houses we don't believe is sustainable, as the additional services for schools, surgeries and transport links wouldn't be viable. Looking at transport, the link between the 376 and the Sidmouth Road via Ormill Lane, not very well known this part, I don't think, is actually single track from the Sidmouth Road end to Woodbury Salterton and would be costly to widen for 2-way traffic. Clearly this road would become part of the infrastructure of a new 2,000 house development in terms of rush hour at least. The new employment area on the opposite side of the A376 would seem to us to require longer journeys up to either Topsham or Cliff St Mary, and another crossing over the 376 I believe has already been rejected for a cycleway as part of the Clist Valley Trail, so clearly issues there. The suggestion of new primary schools, which obviously well welcomed in many ways, is probably unlikely to satisfy the demand, and older students are likely to require car and or bus journeys, causing further overloading on already full secondary schools. Local village primary schools in nearby Woodbury, Salterton, Cliff St Mary, Cliff St George existing are already at capacity. And bus services would need to be expanded from the currently extremely sparse services to link with the proposed cycling hubs. However, we doubt that this would be enough to reduce car trips, especially in all weathers. Topsham Station is nearly 3 miles away, quite a decent bike ride, especially in the rain and cold, and virtually no parking for cars, let alone bikes. Cycling from new homes is not practical, and trains are already at capacity in peak hours. The nearest surgery and pharmacy are also in Topsham, and the post office in Cliff St Mary, and Darts Farm really isn't the co-op. Overall traffic will increase
Could I
significantly.
ask you to wrap up, please, Mr. Booker?
Between 2,000 to 4,000 vehicles. The second, and perhaps one of the most key points to us in Ormill Lane, is that this proposal would include the destruction of best and most versatile agricultural land, a large majority of which is grade 2 and 3A and yields high-value crops currently. This was the basis of the planners rejecting a solar farm within the proposed land.
Mr. Booker, you have had your 3 minutes. Could I ask you to wrap up, please?
Okay, my summary. Overall, the proposed developments will be unsustainable. Best and most valuable land will be destroyed and taken away from food production forever. Reductions in local amenity and will threaten the current rich biodiversity.
We are well over now, Mr. Booker. Thank you. Councillor Howe, do you have a declaration you need to make?
Well, it's more a point of clarity, and if they could turn the mic off up the other end as well, please. I am the sub-postmaster and owner of Cliff St Mary Post Office that was mentioned in that speech, so I just need to be clear.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Howe. Worth commenting, those 3 sites aren't on the agenda for committee to make a decision on today. As you will know, members, we're expecting those will come to the wrap-up session in mid-October, once officers have had the chance to do a full assessment on those quite substantial proposals. With that then, I think we move to agenda items 4 and 5, matters of urgency and any items to be dealt with after the public have been excluded, and I believe there are none for either.
That's correct, Chair.
Thank you, Debbie. Which brings us then to the moment you've all been waiting for, agenda item 6, proposed housing site allocations at Otry, St Mary and surrounds. Mr. Freeman.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, just to start us off, just to give you an update on the current picture in terms of housing requirement and housing numbers.
Members will recall, I think, in the meeting on the 3rd of September, when we first started considering sites, I presented a report to set out that the housing requirement figure for the local plan was 20,812 dwellings based on the government's standard method calculator. However, as officers, we were recommending that we try and aim for a supply figure 10% in excess of that to have headroom to take account of sites that may not come forward for reasons currently unforeseen during the planned period, which helps in terms of maintaining an adequate supply and a 5-year housing land supply requirements during the planned period, which would have added a total of 1,828 additional dwellings to that to give us the headroom. When we started out, we were short on the headroom. We had a headroom of only 1.2% based on officers' recommendations at that time. As we've worked through the last 3 meetings, I think it is, we currently stand at 571 homes less than that figure as a result of the committee's deliberations, albeit obviously some of those sites may well need to be revisited at the wash-up session that the chairs highlighted. So just to highlight, we're currently running with no headroom and a deficit fundamentally against the housing requirement figure. And we need to be looking to bolster that figure in terms of meeting the housing requirements set by government. So that's a challenge. As you'll note, the officer's recommendations included sites so obviously within designated areas such as green wedges, national landscape and coastal preservation areas. So obviously that remains a challenge moving forward in terms of bolstering those figures, given that our recommendations already included sites in those sensitive locations, which obviously we have not done lightly and only made those recommendations due to the need to meet those government figures. So hopefully that's a useful update on where we are in terms of the figures heading into today's discussions. I'll hand over to Mr. Dickens to introduce Otry, St Mary and surrounds.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Freeman. So today we're looking at Otry, St Mary and surrounds. As committee will be aware, the process that officers have followed in terms of site selection has followed a step-by-step logical process involving identifying sites, sifting out those that are deemed not credible as potential options. We've gone through a site assessment process, and this has led on to site selection. But it's worth stressing that the site selection process sits within a bigger strategic picture. So Mr. Freeman's mentioned the need to identify sufficient land to meet government housing figures. So that is part of the top-down element, if you like. We've worked to a spatial strategy, so we've sought to define a logic for where housing would go and why. So these, if you like, are the two top-down components, and the bottom-up component is the site assessment work, and this has led to the recommendations that are before committee. So moving swiftly on, we start with Otry St Mary today. An overview of Otry St Mary. You'll see on the right-hand map that a small number of sites are recommended for allocation, those in green that we'll go through individually, and they're mostly located on the western side of the settlement. And we start with Otry 01, which is partly recommended for allocation, land at Barrack Farm. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dickens. And first up to speak this morning, very warm welcome to Councillor Richard Granger for Otry St Mary Town Council.
Good morning. I am actually put down to speak on all 16 of these, so I might, if I may, give you an overall picture of where we're coming from. We've had an extraordinary meeting of the council last Monday to address this matter, very well attended by the public, and a slightly surprising development came out of the meeting, which is that we are actually in favour of the large Otry 01A, given that it will answer all the needs and it will avoid the constant disruption that constructing new housing at the various sites inside the town itself will bring, which will, as you know, Otry is very, very congested, narrow streets, narrow pavements, and the prospect of 3, 4, 5 years of house building on various sites in the town is really not one that we can contemplate. The overall quality of life in Otry would plunge. However, the large site 01A is on the west side of town. No construction traffic would need to use the town, and it has potential, because of its size, to provide future housing needs for the foreseeable future. So the corollary to that is that we really cannot contemplate any further development inside the built-up area. We don't have a backyard left to build on. And I mean, it's slightly counterintuitive building on a greenfield strip, but looking at it, it's the urban area starts at Taylor's food factory, and it's quite a discrete site. It will lend itself to, if properly developed, improving the connectivity down into the town, because we can put footpaths, cycleways, etc. within the site. And I think that's pretty much all I'd like to say at the moment. I look forward to addressing the individual sites as they come up.
Thank you, Councillor Granger. We come then to the first of many comments from Councillor Vicky Johns.
Hi, I'm Councillor Vicky Johns, Otry St Mary Town Councillor and District Councillor. I'm speaking in my district capacity. Unfortunately, I don't agree with the Town Council, which doesn't happen very often, but does happen occasionally, and I object to this site and agree with the officer's comments that it should not be put forward. One of the points that I'd like to make is on every single site for Otry, it states lack of secondary or primary education provision. It says that on every single site for Otry. However, in other areas, it states things like primary has some capacity to support development, but not to accommodate all of the potential development. Transport costs to secondary would apply. We are aware that King's School is at capacity. They cannot build any further, and that is going to cause massive issues. With regards to this particular site, it is part of the Green Wedge. That is something that is very important to the residents of Otry and West Hill. And although I appreciate what the Town Council are saying with regards to the fact that all building would be in one area, that particular site is in part of designated open countryside, and it should not be used to build housing on. It would also allocate 469 houses. I believe from my brief figures that I did with regards to all the sites put forward for Otry that are in green, we were only going to get possibly, and hopefully not, 254. So this is a massive jump for a town who has grown 25% in the last 12 to 15 years and whose infrastructure has not grown at all. I would also point out that for the whole of Otry, not particularly this site, but specifically 469 dwellings, the town of Otry has the only doctor's surgery that covers Otry, West Hill, Tipton, Fennerton, Wimple, etc. None of that is mentioned here. I know it's not a planning consideration per se. However, for the residents that currently live there that already can wait up to 6 weeks for a doctor's appointment, adding an additional 469 for Otry, 150 for Fennerton, 100 for... It's the massive impact to Otry itself will be horrific. The other thing for Otry is that within the neighbourhood plan that we have currently, that runs until 2031, it does state the countryside of the neighbourhood plan area is a highly valued asset with special character provided by the rolling farmland, wooded hillsides, winding lanes and the open river valley. As you come into Otry, and I've visited here since I was born, basically, because my grandparents lived here, coming into Otry, coming down that road is a very important part of coming home. You come down, it's winding countryside. We've already had a quarry inflicted on us, which all of us objected to and was completely ignored. That's not mentioned at all in any of this. And it also states for O1, new roundabout required to facilitate access. That will have a massive impact on Otry itself. So I agree with the officer's recommendation that this site should not be approved. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johns. Councillor Faithful.
Thank you, Chair. This site is within the settlement containment or green wedge area of the Otry, St Mary and West Hill neighbourhood plan, with the site protruding quite considerable distance into that area. With Broad Street defined as the active centre of Otry town, it is equidistant from the edge of Chimeway Gardens, Slade Road area to the east and King's Reach to the west. Development of the whole site of Otry 01 would leave the residents on the far west end of the site quite isolated with limited public transport provision. The 44A bus that runs out along Exeter Road only being less than an hourly service. Developing out Area A would also have a detrimental effect on the landscape of the area, which is highly visible from many locations around the town, along with other locations around the parish. Area A is also reaching out into the open countryside, well beyond the built-up area boundary. I strongly support Officer's recommendation regarding Otry 01A, and with a heavy heart, while I would not be willing enough to say I support Officer's recommendation, I do not feel I can stand against the proposal of Area B. I would want to see the proposed tree screening and tree buffer with improvements to pedestrian access for the present residents along the lower section of Exeter Road. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Faithful. And we come then for the first time of many today into committee members. Councillor Ingham.
Sorry to be a nuisance, Chair. I wanted to ask a question of Mr. Freeman. After we've dealt with Barrack Farm, can we go back to that? Thank you.
Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Chair. I attended the extraordinary town council meeting that Councillor Granger referenced earlier on in speaking about this site, and I note that one of the concerns of residents was that if we allocate everything into site 1A, then that would free up the rest of the town. But as it's been sort of mentioned in previous committee meetings, there isn't a specific allocated number of dwellings per area. And so just by allocating 1A doesn't mean that the other sites aren't going to be allocated. And so I think it's a huge, huge risk to allocate that site and lose such swathes of open countryside in such a sort of beautiful area when we have other sites that we could allocate. And I know they're not ideal, but we are really stuck between a rock and a hard place in this. And I think that we have to try and make the best of this bad situation. And so I would be in support of the officer's recommendation to move on from 1A and to recommend 1B. Thank you.
Is that a proposal, Councillor Collins? Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Jess Bailey. Sorry, I forgot your name for a second there, Jess.
Thank
and
you.
it's only 10:30. Go on, sorry.
Thank you. Yes, I very much support Councillor Collins. I couldn't see that that is possible. O1A is absolutely miles away from the facilities. it would really harm the open countryside and encroach into the green wedge. And I don't, unfortunately, agree with the Town Council because allocating that will not prevent other sites coming forward. And 469 houses is far too many. Otry has had more growth in the last local plan period than any other town, and we're still feeling the consequences of that with our struggling facilities. So no, I support the officer's recommendation that we move on 01A. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jess Bailey. For the benefit of members of the public, so what you've just heard is our first proposal of the day. In this case, it's two proposals, one for site 01A and one for site 01B, which we'll vote on separately. The proposal for 01B is to allocate the site, which means it would go forward into the draft version of the Regulation 19 plan as a policy allocation. The proposal to move on from 01A, however, is possibly not what you were necessarily expecting for a rejected site. The proposal to move on is grounded in some legal advice that we've had from Mr. Hunter, because this plan has to meet, as Mr. Freeman said earlier, government mandated housing figures, or it's going to be dead on arrival, and we won't be able to move forward any further with it. If we were to vote outright to reject today, the issue we'd have if we got to the end of all of these meetings and found we didn't meet those numbers is we then wouldn't be able to reconsider anything because we'd already have voted on and legally tied our hands in that respect. So that's why you've heard a proposal to move on rather than to reject in case we need to revisit any of these decisions at the wrap-up meeting that we mentioned earlier. So hopefully that makes sense. Councillor Ingham.
Thank you, Chair. I support the recommendation to allocate 1B and to move on 1A with a proviso and an understanding that if we don't approve the other recommended sites, that instead of approving the whole of 1A, you could tag a small part of that into an acceptable possibility rather than kicking it out wholesale or approving it wholesale, which I understand would not be in the interests of Otry for sure.
Thank you, Councillor Ingham. It's always an option on any of these sites for us to allocate part. Whether it would be appropriate in this instance will be for committee to decide, of course. Councillor Howe.
Thank you, and I suppose I just want to comment on what the town council has said, and no disrespect to the town council, I fully understand what they're saying. In fact, this committee on Friday were allocating sites jointly so we could master plan them and everything else. And a larger site in that respect works better because it can be master planned better. So I have a great deal of sympathy with the town council and what they've said. But the reality is we have other sites that we couldn't just say no to because they are deemed sustainable and everything else. So I believe currently as we sit here today, if you took the whole of one, you would still end up with all the others as well. Because it is hard to differentiate the two at this minute in time. But as I say, it's just a point, just to clarify and have a lot of sympathy with the town council and what they've tried to achieve. Thank you.
Councillor Hayward.
Thank you, Chair. Would yourself or the Vice Chair or Mr. Freeman, just for the benefit of, and the members of strategic planning know this, but for the benefit of the members of the public here and watching, just outline the consequences to East Devon if the numbers that are mandated by central government are not met within this plan, just for the purpose of clarity, so everyone understands what we're trying to do today. Thank you.
I can certainly give it a go, Councillor Hayward. So there's a couple of different points there. One, as I've already said, if we don't meet the numbers that government has set out, the local plan that we're producing this time, as I say, will be dead on arrival. That means two things. One, it means that for the foreseeable future, we will continue to not have a 5-year housing land supply, which, as those of you who've been involved with planning decisions in this authority will know, means that developers have In members' view, free range do more or less what they want. That may not necessarily be the case in law, and I'm sure Mr. Freeman would be itching to correct me then that there's simply extra weight given to housing supply, but the truth probably would be somewhere between the two of those positions. The other consequence, potentially, if we can't produce a local plan that meets those housing requirements, is the government could step in and send inspectors to do it for us. And they would not have, I think I'd be right in saying, and fair in saying, anything like the level of sympathy, empathy, local understanding that your ward members here will hopefully show, have hopefully shown over the course of the last few meetings, and will show today. Those are the big ones. Go on, Councillor Howe.
And I suppose the third point is very mindful, is if we don't achieve this local plan, our numbers grow by 200 a year. And that's the big one under government instructions. So to watch out for as well.
Indeed. So we work under a large black cloud, but thank you, Councillor Hayward, worth raising that. Does anybody else wish to speak on site Otry 01? I can see your hand. I'm afraid we're in committee, so I'm not going to be able to come out again. In which case then we have a proposal from Councillor Collins, seconded by Councillor Jess Bailey, to allocate 01B and move on from 01A. Sorry, Councillor Jess Bailey.
I hadn't actually spoken on O1B. I thought we were just dealing with O1A.
Would you like to speak on 01B now?
Yeah, I think it's a comment not just about O1B, but about all of the sites. And I think Otry is a bit different from the other towns in that there are specific comments about education and about the lack of primary and secondary school facilities. And it concerns me that as a committee, we are recommended to allocate where that issue has not been resolved. So if we're going to be, I understand the pressure that we're under for houses, but if we're going to be allocating houses, it needs to be done in a sustainable way, and yet we haven't actually, resolved how that primary and secondary issue is going to be resolved. So I'm concerned that we're allocating houses and education. Where are the children going to go to school? So that hasn't been addressed, and that is a bit different from the other towns where I don't think it's so black and white, which it is in Ottery, that there is an issue with the education.
Would it be helpful perhaps if Mr. Freeman could clarify how those issues are going to be addressed as part of this and other processes?
Thank you, Chair. Well, I mean, there are issues with a number of locations in the district, as members will be aware, and we're working on something called an infrastructure delivery plan with partners at Devon County Council, who in this case would be the Education Authority and other infrastructure providers, to understand how the infrastructure needs would be delivered and how that would be funded and resolved. So that's an ongoing piece of work that needs to marry up with this when we come to presenting the final Regulation 19 version of the plan to members, so that is understood. So I appreciate that's a slight uncertainty at this stage. In terms of Ottery St Mary specifically, members will note that the next site, Ottery_09, presents an opportunity to set aside land, and has previously been set aside as land for education and community purposes, where some of those needs could be met if members were minded to allocate that particular site, which is, well, part of it is already allocated in the current adopted local plan for those purposes. So there is a potential opportunity there when we come to that site to set aside land for some of those purposes at least. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. Okay, any other comments before we move to a vote then? No? Okay, in which case we'll go to a vote on the recommendation to move on from 01A first. All those members in favour of moving on from 01A, please. Our first unanimous decision of the day, hopefully not the last. And the proposal to allocate 01B, those members in favour, please. I see 12. Those against? And those abstaining? 1. Okay, that proposal is carried then. That brings us to Otry 09.
Chair, before you move on, we're finding it very difficult to hear committee members. Can you turn the volume up, please?
Debbie, can we turn the volume up, please?
Yeah, members, can I just advise you, I appreciate that you're talking to the chair, but if you turn your voice away, you can't hear it as well. So if you can direct your voice to the microphone. The risk is if I turn up the volume too much, then we'll start to get some feedback on those members with more louder voices, if I can say that politely. So yeah, keep your microphones a little bit closer and direct towards the microphone would be helpful. And we'll do our best for you at the back. I'll do some tweaks as best I can. Thank you for bringing it to our attention.
Okay, thank you, Debbie. Just before we move on, Councillor Jess Bailey, did you second both of Councillor Collins' motions? No, only 01A. Okay. In which case, Councillor Ingham has kindly just volunteered. Do we need to vote again?
Probably best, yes.
Okay. So the proposal is to allocate 01B, this time correctly seconded. All those members in favour, please. And those against? And those abstaining. There we go. Sorry, Mr. Hunter. I promise I'll be more careful in future. So before we move on to the next site, Councillor Ingham, I think you had a question for Mr. Freeman.
Yes, thank you, Chair. At the introduction, where Mr. Freeman said what our total was plus 10%, and that there was a deficit of 571 at this moment. Is that correct? So, therefore, how many have you actually allocated at this time? That's through 3 meetings. Before we start this meeting, how many have we allocated out of your target?
I'd have to get my abacus out to start counting up because I haven't been keeping a running total so much as a deficit to the officer's recommendations. So I'd have to come back to you with a figure on that.
Can I just check? So the 571, that's not the 3 added together plus adding 10%, and then you end up with 571, or is it?
No, the 571 is a deficit compared to what officers have recommended to go forward so far.
So we've got today's to go for plus fine 571, if possible.
Essentially.
Thank you very much.
But we started off with a deficit as well, so that's 571 deficit compared to where we were at the start on the 3rd of September, which was with a headroom of only 1.2% versus a headroom of 10%, which is what we're aiming for.
Your microphone, Councillor.
Sorry, Chair. So are you saying that this 571 comes from 20,812 plus 10%? Because that's your new target.
The 571 is relative to where officers' recommendations were before we started fiddling with them.
Without any add-ons?
It was, so that recommendation included 1.2% headroom, I believe I'm right in saying.
That's right, and the 571 is the deficit overall. So members have chosen to allocate some that we were not recommending, so those are taken account of.
Yeah.
But there's an overall deficit of 571 compared to where we thought we were at the start of the first meeting.
Thank
you. If that makes sense.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for clarifying that, Councillor Ingham.
Mr. Chairman,
I'm not coming outside. I'm not.
Use Bethany's name because it's getting confused with me. It did on Friday because I spoke a lot Friday morning. Bethany came in the afternoon.
I take that point, Councillor Collins. I think it's fairly clear when we come into committee that I'm addressing committee members, but point taken.
Not if you're listening at home.
Point taken, Councillor Roy Collins. Thank you. Otry 09. Councillor Granger, did you have anything further to say about this one?
Well, 09 is, I think, one of the better known sites up for development in Otry, given that it's owned by Devon County Council and it's already in the neighbourhood plan, I believe, as a site that could be used for instance, building a new school. with reference to what Councillor Bailey has said and Councillor Johns has said, the need for a new school in Otry is becoming more urgent, and bearing in mind that we're trying to allocate more housing to Otry, it becomes an absolute necessity. And this site is head and shoulders, I think, the best on offer for a new school in Otry. However, there is a conflict because obviously it is the preferred site, or the lead in the race for sites for the relocation of Tipton School, Tipton St John Church of England maintained school. That, of course, is yet to be decided. But what it doesn't have is approval for housing. And I think it's already been rejected on those grounds. Its proximity to Cathay Bog is also a worry. I'm happy enough for it to be allocated for a school, but not for housing. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Granger. Before I come to Councillor Johns, I'm just going to quickly come to Mr. Freeman to clarify the situation with what the proposal or the recommendation from officers is with regard to what we allocate here.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Yes, I mean, I think as has already been identified, a large part of this site is already allocated in the adopted local plan for education and community purposes. It is owned by Devon County Council, and I think we're trying to understand exactly the position in terms of school provision here, and also in relation to the primary school in Tipton St John, as one of the proposals was to move the Tipton St John primary school to this site, which was subject to a previous planning application, which was rejected. I think fundamentally what we're recommending here is that we set aside suitable land for school provision, whether that be a primary school for Otry St Mary, potential relocation of Tipton St John Primary School, and also potentially land for the expansion of King's School as well, and the remainder for housing. So the yield is a slightly variable feast depending on how those discussions progress and clarity we can get from Devon County Council. But I think fundamentally we recognise that this land is important in terms of providing for the educational needs of Otry St Mary and the surrounding area, and that has to take priority.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. So to be abundantly clear, even though it's not shown on that map, the proposal is that the site is allocated for both school and housing, with the school use taking priority when the allocation is finalised, if it's allocated.
Yes, that's correct. And the report does highlight those as opportunities and say in terms of yield, I think it says 90 dwellings, and then depending on requirements for school provision, which we're still trying to understand with Devon County.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Freeman. So hopefully that helps clarify things for members. We come then to Councillor Johns.
Hello again. You fed up with hearing from me at the end of the day. I object to this on the grounds that every single site in Otry states lack of secondary or primary education provision. I appreciate what Mr. Freeman has just stated with regards to only part of this land being put aside for housing. However, that's still 90 houses that could have 90 plus children that will have no primary or secondary education within Otry. Other sites across the district where there is no primary or secondary provision, it does discuss how has capacity to support limited development, etc. You know, that there would need to be transport to get to and from additional sites. I think this site should solely be used for education and for community use. King's School could expand onto this site if they had the funds and the means to do so, which I know they've mentioned previously, and it is recorded in one of the forms somewhere, that they need assistance, financial, etc., to be able to expand. That is the perfect site. You could fit an additional secondary school, you know, an extension, as it were, of the King's School and a primary school there quite safely. But I think if we put 90 additional houses there, bearing in mind it also states that we would need a new roundabout required to facilitate the access, etc., and it was turned down previously on the overall impact that those houses, etc., would have. And I know that was for 150 houses, etc. And I know everybody still keeps talking about the relocated Tipton school, but I'm still of a mind that Tipton school should stay exactly where it is. Well, not exactly where it is, but in Tipton. And that if there was a new school here, it should be a new Otry St Mary primary school, as they don't have room to expand where they currently are. So I would advocate that this site stays for educational and community use only, the entire site, as stated in the neighbourhood and local plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johns. Councillor Faithful.
Thank you, Chair. I am very concerned about the proposal to develop out this site due to its close proximity to Cadhay Bog and the ancient woodland around the bog. This woodland is an important wildlife haven that needs sound protection, being a county wildlife site. I'm also concerned about the potential for loss of hedgerows around this site, particularly in view of an earlier planning application for this site. Similar to Otry 01, I'm concerned about the way this site reaches out into the open countryside, away from the town centre, with little transport provision. The main 44 bus turns off at Barrack Cross to Salston Corner and then up through West Hill and Marsh Green, rather than via Daisy Mount and Hand and Pen. Any development on this site needs to address the need for protection of the wildlife in the area and the visual impact that the development will have on the surrounding area. The site is similarly visible from around the main part of the town and from views within the national landscape area, particularly from East Hill Strips area above the town. I would therefore request that tree planting be encouraged to protect the local landscape. Along with my concerns for a potential joining up of Otry with West Hill, I'm also concerned about the potential for coalescence between Otry to Cranbrook, with Cranbrook extension reaching out to Bodley Bridge. There is clear need to ensure that communities are able to maintain their independent identity. I therefore hope that we can progress with our investigation to the green belt rather than our green wedges. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Faithful. I'd hope we'd be worrying about coalescence between Cranbrook and Wimpole or Cranbrook and West Hill before we get to Cranbrook and Otry. But point taken there. I'm going to come to Councillor Jess Bailey first, as she's got a conflict and we'll have to then leave. So, Councillor Jess Bailey.
Thank you. Yes, I support Councillor Johns and Councillor Faithful in what they've said. I think it's unfortunate that Devon County Council, as the local education authority, has put this forward for housing without actually identifying and resolving the issue of education, because not only does it then potentially exacerbate the pressure on education, but it will leave a huge gap in how we actually provide for education within Otry St Mary and the surrounding areas. We need to sort out the pressure on the King School and on the primary school within Otry, and we need to, nobody's discussed with me the infrastructure delivery plan, and I would just request politely that the committee don't allocate. I'm really worried about them allocating this whole site for housing, and I hear what Mr. Freeman says, but we could find ourselves in a situation once the line's been drawn and it's been allocated for housing, we can't guarantee that actually the education side of things will be resolved, and I would really urge the committee to prioritise education, and once that's been resolved, then potentially looking at housing. Thank you.
Thank you for your patience, committee. I've just been confirming some things with Mr. Freeman, who's now going to share those things that we have confirmed.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so just a bit more clarity sort of on the education position, because I think it's fair to say discussions are still ongoing with Devon County Council about exactly what is needed here in terms of education provision. But I think one thing that has been clear from the discussions is that in order to fund the sort of education provision that has been talked about here, particularly, I think if it's not relocating the Tipton St John Primary School to here, for which I believe there's government funding, then there is very much likely to be a need for some housing on this site in order to help fund the education services that would be needed to be delivered here, given funding situation in terms of Devon County Council and, well, all public bodies at this point in time. So I can't help thinking that just allocating the site for education purposes alone could be counterproductive if you actually want to see school provision made on this site. So I think what we need to do is by all means give priority to education provision on this site and leave the yield in terms of the residential units flexible depending on that, and we can have further discussions with Devon County Council about how an allocation of this site is worded in terms of the local plan, whether there's a particular area of land that we can set aside specifically for school and educational purposes and an area for the residential, and how we word the yield of the residential. But I don't think it's necessarily going to be productive to look at this as just land for education purposes if we actually want to see delivery of those school facilities. I do think it needs to be a mixed use development to achieve that outcome.
So just to be absolutely clear, the policy wording, should committee decide to make an allocation, will specifically reserve an area of the site exclusively for school use. It couldn't be put forward as housing.
If that is members' wish, I see no reason why we can't draft wording of a policy that secures that.
In which case then, we come into committee. Very quickly.
Before you do, Councillor, can you please go up to the public microphone, or those at home will not be able to hear your words. Thank you, Chair. Sorry for interrupting.
Sorry, my question of clarification is, my understanding is Devon County Council, obviously, to provide education, need to build houses, sell the houses, etc., to build those. But those houses can be on any site. They don't specifically have to be on the site where that educational facility is being provided. I just wanted clarification on that fact, please.
Well, through you, Chair, they need to be on land that Devon County Council owns in order to be able to sell that land to use the money to fund the school. This is the land that Devon County Council have put forward in Otry St Mary as part of this local plan process.
Sorry, if I may just clarify, but again, it doesn't have to be, it can be any land that Devon County Council own. It doesn't have to be land specifically in Otry to provide a school for Otry or educational use for Otry. I just wanted clarification on that before it goes to committee. My understanding is Devon County Council owns sites across East Devon. They could build housing anywhere and use that money to fund a school wherever they liked within the district. Just clarification, please.
Through Chair, obviously, I mean, Devon County do own land across the district, as has been said, much of which is county farms, which is not land that would be suitable for development. So this is the land that has been put forward by Devon County Council with education as part of the uses. I'm not aware of other sites where they would be able to derive an income that would help to fund this, but I take the point that Devon County no doubt own land across the whole of the county that could potentially be developed. I'm not at liberty to know what the opportunities there exist, but this is the land that's before us and within our local plan process, over which you as a committee have a decision to make.
I suspect other communities getting housing allocations to pay for an Otry school might have something to say about that as well in terms of their own education provision. But there we go. I have Councillor Hayward, who's been waiting patiently.
Thank you, Chair. Well, you hit the nail on the head, and with all due respect to Councillor Johns, Axminster had 800 dwellings, not 200, 800 dwellings allocated on Friday. There was debate amongst this committee, and certainly Axminster would like some extra secondary and primary education to go with that. And I think the residents of Axminster, and in fact any settlement, would feel themselves quite cheated if the money that was taken from Section 106 and still elsewhere was spent not in their communities. That's the nature of where we are. But that essentially illustrates the disconnect. And on this, I'm with Councillor Johns. The report has indicated that there is currently a lack of provision. That's with the housing we've already built. So there's this disconnect that essentially we must build more houses to provide education for the kids who already live there. It's a never-ending cycle, but that's the game we're playing. We're 1.5 applications into today's process. No one has yet mentioned South West Water, which is a miracle, and their dereliction to provide, but I'm sure that will come as we go through. But one of the things that often comes up when we talk about South West Water infrastructure and other infrastructure is grampian conditions. And I'm wondering with this application, mindful of what Mr. Freeman says, that actually you allocate a grampian condition. You say, fine, you cannot build or occupy any of your houses until you've delivered a school on this site that is capable of dealing with the allocation of housing and children needs in the new houses, plus working towards others. But coming back to Councillor John's point, if you don't allocate this, then effectively we get to the end of the process and then we have to perhaps revisit 01A, because that's the nature of what we're dealing with. So if you don't build here on a site that would have probably very good access to that school, you may have to end up building on 01A and other sites, say in Axminster, in Sidmouth, in Exmouth, that are much further away from that school and more challenging. So we are stopped between a rock and a hard place. So we have to take a pragmatic view on this. The only other question really to put to Mr. Freeman is, if members today decided not to allocate, could DCC overrule us because they are a planning authority in their own right? Or would our decision trump theirs, because that would have then a direct impact on a site we're going to consider later? And conversely, you know, there's a flip side to this. So we have to be mindful of a bigger picture, that if we didn't allocate this, essentially, you're potentially green lighting the Tipton site. And that's another added layer to what we have to consider. The order that these applications are done actually have an impact on later discussions. Thank you, Chair.
So, I mean, I think in terms of the first point, I think the intention here would be that the education provision on the site addresses needs in the town and the needs from the growth of the town through this local plan. So hopefully we would end up, if this site were allocated, with a position where we have primary school and secondary provision that is fit for purpose for the town now and into the future. I think in terms of a grampian condition, you run into issues that we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot, because by doing that, I suspect it would suppress the value of the residential land, because any developer building that out is then held back from actually delivering homes until the school has been delivered. I would hope that we could trust the Education Authority to deliver the education provision, since they are statutorily required to deliver education places anyway, so they will have to deliver something in terms of education places to meet the need in the town. And if they've got land that's allocated for that purpose, logically that would be the way of doing that. So I'd question the need to do that, but I understand the concern. In terms of Devon County Council overruling us, well, as a local planning authority, they can apply to themselves for the schools. I don't believe they can apply to themselves for the housing. So they could do that. Whether they would, I don't know. You note that they previously applied to us for the mixed use development on the site, albeit I think it was more houses at that point. So they haven't gone down that route, which I think reinforces the link between the housing being needed to fund the school, and therefore it's pointless them applying just for the school on its own if they can't fund it.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. Thank you, Councillor Hayward. Councillor Blakey.
Thank you, Chair. A question first, if I may. Given that
the report suggests that this site could yield 90 dwellings, but bearing in mind that I think quite rightly education has to be the number one priority, what proportion of that site would actually be taken up by the construction of 90 dwellings? And I appreciate that that's an approximate figure, but how much of a chunk of the land are we actually looking at?
I might bring my colleague in at this point who's gesticulating at me, but I'm not sure what she's saying.
Thank you. It's a 10-hectare site in total. So 90 dwellings on a 10-hectare site is actually not very much of the site at all. It's perhaps a quarter to a third of the site, although bearing in mind that you would also need to keep a sort of landscape buffer to the west of the site because of Cadhay Bog. So it's perhaps less of a developable area than some other sites would be.
So by the sounds of things, we could be looking, if it were 90 dwellings, it could be taking into account that buffer, perhaps half the site for housing development, which seems a little on the strong side, or am I misreading the maths?
I think we're saying it would be less than half of the site. I think the previous application was about 150 houses and land for the school. So the number of homes has reduced since that application to, I think, partly help to address some of the sensitivities and concerns that were raised at that time. We think 90 is achievable with the land for the school. But I think, as has been said, I think it's clear the priority needs to be the school provision. So we need to come up with some wording in the plan that makes that clear. And if in meeting the needs of education provision in the town they can't get to 90 homes, then so be it. That number needs to drop and flex according to that. I think that's further conversations we can have with Devon County to inform the wording of the allocation that actually goes into the plan.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Blakey. I'm going to exercise Chair's prerogative. Having heard the discussion here, I think we're very clear that we want to see land reserved for the school here, and that if housing is required to fund that, if that's what we're saying, then, fine. But that there needs to be a very clear priority given to land for the school first. On that basis, bearing in mind that the policy wordings will come back here in the draft plan for us to review and have oversight over, make sure that we are satisfied, and that in the interim Devon County will have some input on that as well, I'm happy to propose officer's recommendation from the chair on that basis. Councillor Ingham.
Well, you've just done it, Chair, so let's go and vote.
Okay, Councillor Davey.
Thank you, Chair. I have to agree with Councillor Johns about Tipton St John Primary, and I think the discussion about relocating Tipton St John Primary to Otry St Mary is somewhat unhelpful, and we've been much better thinking of it as an extra primary school for Otry St Mary, and then deal with Tipton St John as a separate issue. I'm grateful to Councillor Faithful for pointing out the environmental constraints here as well, and I would hope those could be dealt with at planning committee, as possibly could a Grampian condition on sewage provision. And obviously the specifics of the layout and how much land is allocated, etc., could also be dealt with at planning. So on the assumption that we are ensuring that this entire site cannot be used for housing only, I'm quite happy to support.
Okay, do any other members wish to speak on this allocation? No? Okay, in which case the proposal from the chair, in accordance with officer's recommendation, is to allocate the site for school first, houses second. All those members in favour, please. That's unanimous. Okay, yes, could we bring Councillor Jess Bailey back in, please? Okay, that brings us then to site GHED 26, land west of Cadhay Lane. Councillor Granger from the Town Council. Right.
Yeah, this is a very large outlier. Objections to this site are rather similar to the ones that have been expressed over O1A. This entirely wipes out the green wedge between Otry and West Hill. I wasn't put forward for recommendation by your committee, and it's not supported by the Town Council. I don't think I need to say much more. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Granger. Short and sweet. Councillor Johns.
Thank you. I should be short and sweet too. I agree with the officer's recommendation not to put this forward for various reasons. The site should not be allocated as it extends into the open countryside, has high ecological and heritage sensitivities, and development would be visible from some considerable distance. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johns. Councillor Faithful.
While I am in support of our officer's recommendation I would like to make a note of this. What am I saying? I would like to make a note of the need to move on. This site will have a major impact on the valley from Solston to Foxenhole area. This valley forms an important valued view which was overlooked in the forming of our Otry and West Hill neighbourhood plan. There are so many potential views along the valley that it is difficult to decide which one is the most important, from the bridge at Foxenhole to the entrance to the Solston. This site is also highly visible from around the town and more distant locations across the parish. I therefore would like to support the officer's recommendation and ask the committee to vote to move on and ask that you do not come back.
Thank you, Councillor Faithful. Councillor Young, I have you first, and then Councillor Davey.
Thank you. I agree with the officers and the speakers, and yes, can we move on and maybe not come back?
To be clear, is that a proposal to move on from Councillor Young? Councillor Davey, did you wish to second it?
I will second that, and unfortunately we can't say we won't come back, but I think we're pretty well minded that this is not a site we're likely to revisit.
Do any other members of committee wish to speak? No? Okay, in which case I'll take the opportunity to say I completely agree with everything that's been said, and if it hadn't already been proposed, I would be proposing that we moved on as well. With that said then, we have a proposal to move on from Councillor Young, seconded by Councillor Davey. All those in favour, please. That's unanimous and resounding, if I may say so. We've been going for an hour and 20 minutes now, so we're going to take a 10-minute break until 11:30. Okay, before we pick up again, just a quick word from Mr. Hunter.
Thank you, Chair. It's just to clarify, earlier when members were giving declarations, both Councillor Johns and Councillor Howe both declared an ORI, which is an other registrable interest, on the basis that they were saying that they're both members of their local parish council. Now, the only reason they need to declare that is if actually the parish council was going to benefit in some particular way from the applications that were being put forward, because they, say, for instance, were the owner of the land. And I've clarified with them both that that's not the case with any of the sites on today's agenda. So I've said to them, actually, I don't believe that they do need to declare an ORI. After all, they've got no interest. So not that that probably means a lot to most of you, but I just wanted to clarify that for the purpose of the recording before we move on today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hunter. And with that then, we come to Otry 10, and members, you're on notice now. We will do GHED 27 immediately after Otry 10 as well, as they're next door to each other. And first up, we have, I have here on my sheet a question mark by Dr. Debbie Dunsford. Dr. Dunsford? I have you down as a possible public speaker on this site. You don't have to. Now is the time, yes. If you press the right-hand button, there you go. You have 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. What I wanted to point out was more of a general concern that I have across the strategic environmental assessment and sustainability appraisal, in that we've got sites around East Devon which have broadly similar characteristics but are then treated differently in the appraisal. And this is one such example here. We've got, this will round off a section of the town. Now, I did a quick search of the document. Nowhere else does any other settlement have rounding off as a reason to promote an area of development. And in fact, if we go to further north to the village of Plymtree and its satellite hamlet Norman's Green, the actual plan assessment says retain the separation. And for us at Solston, Solston is a separate hamlet. Not only that, it's not visible from the road, it's not visible from the AONB, from the protected landscape. Solston, both Solston Barton and Solston Ryde, are completely hidden in a dip, with the exception of the Otter Hayes residential facility for disabled people, which actually hasn't been mentioned in terms of impacts of any of the development sites. So that's my main concern. And the other one is that the strategic environmental assessment, when it is considering the effects on population, it's only ever considered the effects for the population that will be moving into the new development area. It's actually not considering the effects on the existing population. So I'm just asking that when these sites around Solston are discussed, we consider it as a hamlet, which it is. We consider it as having minimal visual impact on the landscape. And it is not, in fact, an extension of Otry St Mary. It's a separate place in its own right, with Solston in its postal address. I'll stop there, Chairman. Hopefully that's within time. Thank you.
Thank you. It was indeed. We then come to Councillor Granger from the Town Council.
Another brief one. I'd like to commend Denise's opinions to the committee, and say that, well, this is Otry 10, isn't it? Yes. It's hard to see how this is going to, I think we'd have to take it in concert with the neighbouring site at land south of Strawberry Lane, which would completely urbanise that corner. There are some serious issues over flooding down at the bottom of the site, both sides actually. And the council doesn't support the site, as there's no access to to the road with no pavement or street lights, and the site is prone to flooding. I think I'll leave that one there. There'll be more to say at the next.
Thank you, Councillor Granger. Councillor Johns.
Hi, can I just clarify that we're just talking about Otry 10, or are you wanting us to talk about Otry GHED 27 at the same time?
We're doing Otry 10 now, we'll do 27 next.
Thank you. That's not part of my 3 minutes, that was the question. Okay, so I object to this site due to the fact that it states the site is within 1,600 metres of all facilities except a train station, and mentions keeping the footpath which runs through the site. But there is no suitable foot cycleway for people to access the facilities, as Strawberry Lane is too narrow to place a footpath or cycleway. There has already been various incidents along the road with people being clipped by vehicles, as it is the main road from West Hill, Tipton St John to Otry. The site is surrounded by very narrow roads which lend themselves to single vehicle access in various places. Adding houses here will have a detrimental effect on the residents who already reside there. There is mention of part of the site being within the flood zone, but no mention of how the additional housing could affect the houses on lower sites who already have issues with surface water runoff. I know that a lot of houses were flooded in 2008, but I'm also aware that the houses there had issues since the Bovis site was built due to the fact that they're lower lying. I have grave concerns about this site. As far as I can work out, Salston, Barton and Salston Ryde by definition are hamlets. A hamlet is a small settlement that has no central place of worship and no meeting point. For example, a village hall. Picture a handful of houses dotted along a road or a crossroads, perhaps separated from other settlements by countryside or farmland, and as such they deserve the same protection as other hamlets. I noticed that in Plymtree 04, reason for allocating or not allocating the site was put as a no, due to the fact that it would join Norman's Green to Plymtree, impacting on the separate character and identities of both settlements and the open countryside character. I would argue that 10 and GHED 27 are both hamlets and should not have this site thrust upon them. One of my main concerns is the fact that they keep mentioning footpaths. Lots of other sites across East Devon, when it mentions that there's no footpath or there's no street lighting, that's a reason for allocating against it. For some reason, Otry, every time they mention there's no footpath, go, just chuck one in. I don't think some of the members of the strategic planning, and perhaps some of the officers, no disrespect, actually know Otry at all and understand just how narrow some of the roads are. It may look like it's suitable for 2 vehicles, but as somebody who's lived here most of my life, the majority of people, A, don't know the size of their vehicle, and B, don't realise that you can actually go up against a hedge without completely wiping your car out. Sometimes it's easier, obviously, to hit a cyclist or pedestrian, apparently. And I have grave concerns about this site, how it's going to access. It does mention going through the Bovis site, but I don't know if anyone's actually been to the Bovis site. The access to it is either from halfway down the road, the no man's road as it's called, it doesn't have a name, halfway down towards the King's School site, but there's no path to get there and it's very narrow, or, as I like to refer to it, the path to nowhere that comes out at the Bovis site, directly opposite the cricket club, which then takes you into the main road. It now has a built-up, thank you to Councillor Jess Bailey, but it actually takes you directly out onto the road and there is no path in either direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johns. Councillor Faithful.
Thank you, Chair. This site works in connection with GHED 27. As described in the report for GH26, pedestrian and cycle access is very poor, with Strawberry Lane being the main route into the town centre, having no pedestrian walkway. I would expect any development on this site to make a contribution, including land for improvements to the lane. The development of Island Farm Kingsreach area has created waterlogging issues on part of the cricket ground. There is clear need for alternative methods of addressing water runoff. This might include attenuation ponds on higher ground. Setting an attenuation pond on the floodplain has demonstrated that it will cause the water table to drop, by allowing the water normally retained in the ground to have a place to drain out into, thereby causing more flooding rather than less. Both Otry 10 and GHED 20, which one, what am I writing here? Yeah, 27, are located in close proximity to an established cluster of dwellings at Salston Barton. I am very concerned that poor layout, design and architecture can have a detrimental impact on present residents' privacy and right to light. I would therefore question the housing numbers put forward for these two sites. The report suggests the undergrounding of the overhead cables. The cables crossing Otry 10 and GHED 27 include the main power supply to Otry and the surrounding area with a pylon on Salston Corner. It is not just about lowering lower voltage power lines on wooden posts. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Faithfull. Coming into committee then, I have Councillor Bethany Collins.
Thank you, Chair. I would echo what my fellow ward members have said in relation to this site and also GHED 27. The Strawberry Lane is incredibly narrow. There's a particular point where the road bends which is just sort of where the footpath to nowhere that Councillor Johns referenced comes out, and cars often come round that corner on the other side of the road. And I've almost been hit whilst I've been driving, so I dread to think what the impacts could be of people coming out of that footpath onto the road would be. And I would just question where this proposed footpath could go. It's incredibly narrow. Obviously, there's sort of housing and a caravan site either side. And I just don't think I can support this site based on that, because I just think it's incredibly unsafe. And for that reason, I would not be supporting the officer's recommendation to allocate this site.
Thank you, Councillor Collins. Councillor Jess Bailey.
Thank you. I'm also opposed to Otry 10 and ED 27. I think that, well, first of all, it's not safe. It won't be safe for residents from here to walk along Strawberry Lane. It's too narrow, you can't put a pavement in, and it's just not safe, and it's particularly dangerous on the bend section and also at the section where it joins the main road. And I really don't think we should be allocating this. I also do not agree with the rounding off Ottery. I think, that's completely inconsistent with other settlements. It's not rounding it off. It's actually extending it into the countryside. And I also think that we need to respect the individuality of our hamlets and not join our hamlets up with a town. So for that reason as well, I shall be opposing this allocation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jess Bailey. Before I come to Councillor Blakey, I'm just going to look to officers for some commentary on the issues with the pedestrian access, please.
Thank you, Chair. So my understanding is that there's a current outline application on this site which proposes as part of it creating a crossing across Strawberry Lane into, I think it's Pavey Close, is it? Pavey Run, which is to the north of the site, which you can think... Sorry, but it could link through into 27 and then create that link through to the north. So links through could be created through that route to then give walking and cycling links through into the town from there. So yes, I mean, I think the two sites do almost come together in that regard.
So officers would be suggesting that this is one allocation, not two, if both are approved by committee. Is that part of that equation?
Well, as adjoining sites, I think it would be legitimate to require them to come forward in a coordinated way through some kind of master plan to make sure we secure appropriate pedestrian access links through both sites. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Freeman. Councillor Jess Bailey to respond.
Thank you. There's no safe route from King's Reach into Ottery St Mary, because the only way you can go is back out onto Strawberry Lane. And to think that residents are seriously going to divert all the way up there and then come down and have to exit King's Reach back onto the road without a pavement, that just doesn't solve the issue.
I think we'll give officers a moment to look at that and then possibly come back. But I had Councillor Blakey.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Is there a compromise available here? Taking into account comments that have been made about the fact that this is a hamlet and wants to keep itself as such, quite understandably, there needs to be a buffer between the hamlet and the remainder of Otry St Mary. So would it be sensible to propose a compromise, which is not to allocate Otry 10, and to say that as regards GHED 27, that perhaps only the southern half might be available for development, which would make sufficient space for perhaps, give or take, 30 dwellings. Obviously not as many as the allocation that is wanted, but that would enable some development to take place whilst retaining that separate identity as a hamlet. So perhaps if Mr. Freeman was listening, he could comment on that one as well.
I'm sure Mr. Freeman would resent the implication that he wasn't listening. I'm afraid once we're in committee, we can't come out again, sorry. Have we got any commentary on the pedestrian access issues and a response to Councillor Blakey's thoughts?
Through Chair, I mean, I think we had assumed that you could come through the King's Reach development out onto Barrack Road in terms of pedestrians and cyclists. We appreciate there's no vehicular link through, but in terms of sustainable routes to travel through and into the town, that would be the logical route. In terms, apologies, I was talking to my colleague. Could Councillor Blakey repeat his question, please?
Yeah, the idea was that we don't allocate Ottery 10, which is to the east of the site, but actually only allocate the southern half of ED 27, thereby retaining, albeit a smaller buffer, between the Salston hamlet and the extant Ottery St Mary. Is that a sensible proposal?
It's certainly an option if members are concerned about retaining a separation between Salston Manor and the adjoining development and Ottery St Mary. I have to say, I'm going to be shot down in flames here, but I've not heard of Salston referred to as a hamlet previously, so I hadn't really thought of it in those terms. I don't know if other officers had. No, shaking the head. So I think we hadn't considered it to be a hamlet in its own right, to be honest. Saw it as a manor house that's slightly detached from the town with some development around it, but not necessarily a hamlet in its own right.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Freeman. Continuing on through my list then, Councillor Ingham.
Thank you, Chair. I think there is a danger that people may wish to spontaneously create a new green wedge that doesn't exist. And we've already been considering a whole plethora of sites that are in green wedges that have had history of planning applications over decades that I would suggest have a valid accountability for, justify moving on. But this site, it's not in a green wedge, the coastal preservation area or the national landscape. And the best we've come up with is that it might create a coalescence that no one's mentioned in planning terms within this council before. So, or if they have, it hasn't been taken up formally on any occasion. So because of that, and looking at the other proposals, the other sites, which have, I believe, very valid reasons for not being considered, we're in danger of picking up reasons for not allocating this, which aren't in planning terms valid, Chair. So that's why I propose it for allocation.
So just to be clear, Councillor Ingham, you're proposing Otry 10 to be allocated. Okay, constitutionally then, I need to look for a seconder first. Councillor Howe?
I will at this point, because I still haven't been convinced of anything other. I'm not happy about it, but at the same time, I think we need to work on it and see where we go.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Howe. I have then Councillor Brian Bailey and then Councillor Young.
Thank you, Chair. I think if this was an ordinary planning meeting instead of a strategic meeting, I would say for all the reasons that have been given by my colleagues, I disagree with Councillor Benninger, unfortunately, but everybody else has spoken and I agree with what I think. This is going to encourage coalescence, there's no two ways about it. It's a long walk into town, a really long walk. There's no footpaths, it's very bendy, there's no street lamps. So if this was a planning application, we would turn it down for these reasons. So therefore, I cannot support it as it stands. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Brian Bailey. Councillor Young.
Yeah, listening to all the speakers, I can see the negatives of this site. I know that lane very well. I've been taken out on that lane as well. The southern bit is in the floodplain. Is that floodplain 3, level 3? I can see that there are issues with that, issues with pedestrian accessing it, further cars using that lane. And I can see why the meeting at Otry the other day did go for Otry 01 rather than this one here. So I won't be supporting this one.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Young. Councillor Hayward, then Councillor Davey.
Not to overrule you, Chair, but I'm pretty sure Councillor Davey did have his hand up a long time before me.
Then I'll go Councillor Davey, then Councillor Hayward. Sorry, I didn't see you, Wally.
That's all right. Thank you, Paul. I'll be quick. I just have serious concerns about the access here by any means, whether it's in a vehicle, on a bike or walking. And I support the latter two before the first. But I don't see that this is a particularly good site in terms of access. And I'm not happy about it, about allocating it.
Councillor Hayward.
Thank you. On one sense, I agree with Councillor Ingham. I don't believe this is coalescence. I don't think, well, again, I don't live here. Viewing it dispassionately from outside, I would just say that this is a very lovely, tranquil conurbation of houses that happen to have been detached from the main dwelling. We have them in Axminster, they exist in All Saints, and they exist in Chardstock. From my view, it's not a separate settlement per se. And I'm sure it's delightful to be there, albeit there's quite a few flooding issues, it seems there. However, on the point that the connection to the town, the footpath, the cycleway, driving is so dire. On that basis, I'm going to support the proposal that we move on from this, because I don't think it's practical and reasonable to develop this. When we come to the adjoining site, then mindful of Councillor Baker's point, I will have a further discussion on that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hayward. Before I come to Councillor Bethany Collins then, I think Mr Freeman wanted to show us some pretty pictures.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, if Matt could switch over. Yeah, so just to clarify what I was saying earlier about the application on the adjoining land. So this is the, it's an outline application, so this is indicative only, but obviously we're talking about this site here on the adjoining land. This line here is an existing public right-of-way that runs through that, so it would have to be retained through any development of that site that leads across. This is Strawberry Lane up here. And you'll see on the indicative layout there showing a layout which has footpaths running north-south through the site up to this crossing point, which would then go into the King's Reach development, from which you can then walk or cycle through to Barrack Lane and into the town through there. So there is the potential to deliver that kind of link. It would need to be in conjunction with the adjoining site, which would obviously come on to. But my point is that it is achievable in terms of a pedestrian and walking, pedestrian and cyclist route into the town from there. Thank you.
Is it a direct response, Councillor Jess Bailey? Okay.
I think the distance you'd be talking about is way, way, way over 1,600 metres. And it's just not feasible to think that pedestrians will be able to go all that way. If you look at how far the bottom of O27 is, to take people all the way up to the top and then all the way around, it's just not going to happen. It's not achievable.
Councillor Bethany Collins.
Thank you. I was just interested in, obviously, Mr Freeman mentioned the access, the pedestrian access from Pavey Run previously. I was just wondering where he was referring to that access being.
So that's through the King's Reach development? Yes. Well, I'm just looking at aerial photographs, so it looks like you can come through. There's some county highways land, I believe, on this corner, so you could break through there across the road and into the development, and then you can wind through, and I believe there's a gap up here into Barrack Lane, looking under the aerial photographs. Appears to be a gap through to Barrack Lane at that point, at which point you'd be able to walk and cycle along Barrack Lane and into the town. I appreciate it's a reasonable distance. I haven't measured it, but picking up on Councillor Bailey's point, 1,600 metres. I'm being told it's 1,600 metres.
Okay. So we have a proposal on the table from Councillor Ingham, seconded by Councillor Howe, to allocate Otry 10. That is the substantive motion at the moment. Before I take us to a vote on that, does anybody else wish to speak on this site? No? Okay. It would probably be remiss of me not to remind members of that 571 house deficit that we mentioned at the outset, but that's all I'm going to do. We'll go to a vote then. The proposal is to allocate Otry 10. Those members in favour, please. I count 1. Those against? I count 8. And those abstaining? That's 4. So that proposal falls, and I will then wait until somebody gives me an alternative proposal. Councillor Jess Bailey.
I propose we move on.
Seconded by Councillor Bethany Collins. All those members in favour of the proposal to move on? Can we have hands staying in the air, please? Thank you. I count 9. 9, okay. Those against? 1. And those abstaining? 3. Does that add up the same both times? Okay. So we move on from Otry 10 then, which brings us to, we're going to go slightly out of order. We're going to go next door to GHED 27, which is a few further down my sheet of paper here. And we have Mr. Timothy Dudgeon.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman and Councillors, for letting me speak against this planning application. I'm speaking not as an individual, but on behalf of a group mainly comprising households on the borders of the proposed development. Salston Cross, Salston Barton, Salston Ride, Salston Manor, and we call ourselves Strawberry Fields Forever. My two concerns are flooding and safety. So if I start off with safety, if you come out of Salston Ride and join the main road from Tipton, Fluxton up to Salston Cross, King's School have already designated this road too unsafe for school children to walk to school, so they have to be picked up by a schoolhouse at the end of Salston Ride. Just after you enter the road I've just talked about, there's a very sharp bend, which has been spoken to before, where there's a bridge over the stream, which is a site of flooding and a single passage for vehicles. Numerous small accidents have occurred here. Indeed, the bridge was badly damaged by a tractor 2 years ago and had to be rebuilt. The road then comes up to Scolston Cross, but at times wide enough for 2 cars, but often 1. Salston Cross, you turn left to West Hill, straight across under an unnamed road, you go past King's Reach towards Barrack Road and King's School, and right downhill to Otry St Mary. If you go straight across, as I've just said, it's a very narrow road with a games field on the left, and this is a major, major site of danger. Out of school hours on several days of the week, cars collect in large numbers, and this will be readily sort of backed up by members of Ottery Town Council. There may be 30 cars parked on the verges, making it extremely dangerous. And in fact, 2 weeks tomorrow, I was driving in as a passenger in actual fact, and we came at about 7 o'clock at night. A football came out of the thing, a little boy ran out from behind a parked car, completely didn't look left or right. If we'd been 3 seconds, we could have knocked him over and killed him. It is dangerous, and it's by having increased houses, it's going to make it more dangerous. If you turn right, and we have videos and photos to accompany this if you would like to see them. If you turn right down Strawberry Lane, again, it's wide at the top and then it narrows to 1, and then going round the corner where Salston Barton joins it, it spreads out a little bit, and then past the Bowls Club, the Cricket Club, and the new pedestrian access from King's Reach. But it's a very, very narrow road, badly lit, no pedestrian access. It floods, so if pedestrians are doing it, they have to come out into the centre of the road to avoid going through the floods. So it is a very poorly, it's a dangerous area. The traffic is increasing along here. Salston Manor has been developed and will shortly be full, and so that will produce extra traffic. The farm traffic has increased both in size and size, I mean size of the vehicles and quantity. If Tipton School is to be relocated, and I've heard quite a lot about this today, then there's
Could I
going
ask
to be
you to wrap up?
Yeah,
please?
increased growth. The footpath, we've talked about the footpath, I won't go on it anymore. Flooding, water goes downhill. So Salston Barton is at risk.
Could I ask you just to
Yeah,
draw to a conclusion,
there's a
please?
well in one of the houses in Salston Barton, and the pump is having to be on at the moment because the water table is high. Salston Ride, the houses are in the floodplain and have difficulty getting house insurance. Those risks are going to be increased by this development. So from a safety point of view and a flooding point of view, and a lot of the stuff that we've heard about from the previous development, I recommend that it's rejected.
Thank you, Mr. Dudgeon. Could you turn the microphone off, please? Sorry.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Thank you. And I have then Dr. Dunsford. Did you wish to speak again?
Yes, please. We've heard a lot about the roads. I can do nothing but endorse the fact that all 4 roads leading from that site are 1 car width for some, or all of their length. There's been collisions with the bus, collisions with pedestrians. But the flooding issue, we're looking at a 2-dimensional map. Actually, what we're looking at with GHED 26 is a field where the land levels are over the top of, are above in elevation, the roofs of the houses of Salston Barton and Salston Ride, which are in a little dip. This means not only are they disproportionately visible from East Hill strips, and I've taken some photos to prove it, it actually is like extending King's Reach almost parallel to the main iconic viewpoint at Whitecross Car Park from the AONB. It effectively adds a third of the width of Otry St Mary. Flooding is also a very, very serious issue for us. We're already receiving, we already flood. We've seen that residents had to be moved out of their properties for up to 5 months. Now, DEFRA, when they're calculating flood risk damages, mental impacts of flooding, mental health impacts of flooding are very important. Research is backed up by research, and it's especially relevant when people have to move out of their homes for this sort of prolonged period. I'm also very concerned that if you're putting natural flood management measures in, we're so close, there's no room for them to have any measurable effect, and that the flooding could affect not just Salston, but it could affect the Bowls Club, the Petanque Club, the Cricket Club, the electricity substation, and some vulnerable homes in the form of what you call static caravans. It could affect all of those. The other point is that we've lost a number of footpaths in Ottery, particularly the footpaths access the bridge across to King's School, the pier, the supporters washed away. A tree fell on it because the roots were eroded so significantly. And the only footpath that makes the river accessible to disabled people has also been washed away. Downstream, we've seen significant erosion. And what I'm trying to say here is that it's not for no reason that East Devon District Council have put in place natural flood management measures dotted up and around the catchment. If we develop these sites that are right on the very edge of the floodplain, there is no means to attenuate that floodwater. It's floodwater that's not just flooding properties, it's causing all that erosion of the riverbank and the important public footpath connection that people enjoy. Thank you.
Just in the nick of time. Thank you, Dr. Dunsford. Not to constrain people's right to democratically have their say, but perhaps members could just bear in mind time moves on, and I'll leave it there. With that, Councillor Granger.
A lot of what I was going to say has already been said by our 2 fine representatives. What we can't tell from this map is the actual topography, and Dr. Dunsford's quite correct. There's a steep slope. Any housing development there would be able to look down into the gardens of the existing houses at Salston Ride and Salston Barton. We had a presentation from a representative of the developer about a month back concerning the outline planning application, which they subsequently have put in. And out of all the planning applications that I've seen over the last 7 years as a member of Otry's planning committee. It's the first one that actually mentioned the provision of low-cost housing, shared ownership, housing association development, that sort of thing. That is a shining shame on all the developments that we've had. And the last thing we want and need is more McMansions, which no one in Otry can afford. So, the mood and feeling at that well-attended meeting, and I'm here to represent the views of the people that live in the town, was that they're against it. The path access to the Bovis development is along past the football field and then in Pavey Run. It's entirely impractical. People will always take the shortest route, and that's the road that floods, is dangerous, is narrow and unlit. So it's not sustainable to put this development here. I shall leave it there.
Thank you, Councillor Granger. Councillor Johns.
Hi. I was advised at the beginning of the meeting that any upcoming planning applications are not to be discussed in here. They're not related to what we're discussing. And yet, funnily enough, they're mentioned when they're trying to push sites through. Just thought I'd mention that. GHED 27 is been put forward for 60 houses. The planning application currently in stands for 63 houses. I will reiterate what everybody else has already said. I am really concerned that there is no existing footpath along Strawberry Lane. I know that there has been discussion about linking it to the Bovis site. However, I don't know if you've actually been to the Bovis site. The majority of the houses are built right up to the boundary, hence why there's no path on the inside of the Bovis site that go down that road and link it to anywhere else. It has a path to nowhere. It has a path halfway along between this site and the King's School. There's a path that opens up halfway along there that takes you into there, but there's no path to actually access that path safely. The water runoff is a great concern. The houses that live below here, and please be aware, they will be living below this site. They're not adjacent to this site, they're below this site. They have issues with water runoff with it being a field. That water runoff is going to increase massively when housing is put in there, regardless of whether or not they put in beautiful trees and bushes, etc. They're also putting houses in, and the runoff alone is going to cause massive issues. I don't know if all the strategic planning have actually driven down that road when it's been raining for more than half an hour, but the road itself now floods because of the King's Reach development, and they're constantly digging it up, by the way, the Bovis site, because they're having massive issues with the water runoff there. Just thought I'd put that in. The officer's report states that the site is on the periphery of the settlement and has a semi-rural character. It could be considered to round off this part of the town. This is the only site on the local plan put forward that feels that our town needs to be rounded off. We're quite happy with it as it is. It doesn't need rounding off. We're quite happy having a little bit jutting out here and there. That's how we like it. The most concern that I have is that there is no safe walking or cycle path to the centre of the town. You cannot access the Bovis site from it. The houses are built right up to the edge. I'm aware of the planning application that's been put in. I have specifically not looked at it because I sit on town council planning, so I was waiting until after this before I actually look at it. But yeah, that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johns. Councillor Faithful.
Stupid thing. Oh. Can I start again?
No.
My script is gone silly.
3 minutes is 3 minutes, Councillor Faithful. We have a lot of sites to get through.
Basically, this site is, along with what I've said about Otry 10, this is potentially overbearing. The site is on brow of a hill. it has a visual impact from both east and west. There's also issues of waterlogging on lower ground caused on the cricket ground. We also have the bowling green and the petanque court in that area. I'm also concerned about the issues of public footpath. When you leave this meeting, you have an alternative route you can take to get home via Columpton. Would you use it? So how can you expect the residents, particularly there's plenty of residents up in West Hill, would we want to go all the way around the other way to get to the end of Strawberry Lane? And I don't think it's realistic. What else am I saying? Oh, that'll do for now.
Thank you, Councillor Faithful. In view of the comments that I've heard and the comments that we've heard on the previous application, Otry 10, I think it's abundantly clear committee aren't going to support this site either. So in the interests of good order and getting on to other discussions, I'm going to propose from the chair that we move on from this site, and it may simply be that we need to come back to it and reconsider it down the line when we don't meet our numbers. But for the purposes of today, I'm going to propose that we move on, and I will look for any other comments from committee if necessary, but would suggest that perhaps our time might be better spent discussing other sites. Councillor Hayward.
It's just a very brief interlude. The first is a question to Mr. Freeman, and it comes back to a point Councillor Bailey raised. 1,600 metres, is that based on following the available roads, or is that as the crow flies across the whole of the spectrum of what we're doing?
So I've drawn the squiggly line on Google Maps, and it does follow where you would actually walk.
Very much indeed, because that makes a difference to us. I suppose the only other thing to add in, and I'm grateful for your comment, is 87% of Devon's roads are like this. That's the nature of East Devon. There's a few primary roads, A's and B's, some C's. 87% of what we're having to contend with is roads like Strawberry Lane. So I just want to throw that into the mix. That's part of the challenge we face.
Thank you, Councillor Hayward. Okay, any other particularly salient comments? No? Okay, in which case then the proposal from the chair is to move on from GHED 27 for today. All those in favour, please. That's everyone except Councillor Ingham, so 12. Those against? And those abstaining? That's 1. Okay, thank you, members. That brings us then to site Otry 15. And I have first up, Councillor Granger.
This is the one up Slade Road in someone's back garden. It's the council feels that we acknowledge that development would cause minimal impact, but do feel that adequate facilities such as a pavement need to be provided, because it's just a rural piece of tarmac between the hedges, and it's it has minimal impact. It doesn't have a vast amount to recommend it, but in the circumstances, I wouldn't oppose it.
Thank you, Councillor Granger. Councillor Johns.
Thank you. I mean, technically, it's the same issues where everything else, lack of secondary, primary school, etc. It is within access of all the facilities, but those facilities are already seriously overloaded. What I would say is, and I don't want you all gloating about this, I would say it's the wrong side of Otry, just because of the issues that there are. There is no right side before you start laughing, Todd, but it is the wrong side. What I would say is the report states there is the opportunity to provide a section of footpath along the front of the site and potentially along the front of the adjoining property, as they are owned by the same owner. I would ask this is looked into thoroughly and ensure the pavement is of adequate width to allow pushchairs, mobility vehicles to gain access to the town itself with no issues. Again, Otry should not be left with substandard pavements just to make life easier for others. So that's what I will say on this site. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johns. Councillor Faithful.
I am concerned about the relatively high number of houses with such poor pedestrian access to this site. While there are pavements in the area of the entrance to Chimeway Gardens, the pavement ends well before this site and the property next door. Slade Road at this Slade Road at this point is a narrow road with little room for vehicles to pass. There are a relatively high number of business further uphill the hill, causing quite high volumes of vehicle movements.
Thank you, Councillor Faithful. We've heard a lot about pavements. I thought I'd make the slightly flippant observation that if we didn't allocate any sites that didn't have a direct pavement connection to all of their services, we probably wouldn't allocate anything in East Devon at all. But there we go. I have Councillor Young and then Councillor Bethany Collins.
Thank you, Chair. Listening to the speakers, I would recommend this this proposal, as long as there's a footpath. Sorry, as suggested in the documents. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Young. I'll look for a seconder. Councillor Ingham, do you wish to speak? Okay, thank you. I have Councillor Bethany Collins then.
No, it's all been said, so let's vote.
Okay, Councillor Brian Bailey, did you have anything to add or can we move to a vote? Okay. Any other comments on this site? No? Okay, in which case the proposal from Councillor Young, seconded by Councillor Ingham, is to allocate site Otry 15. All those members in favour, please. That's 12. Those against? And those abstaining? That's 1. Okay. That brings us then to site Otry 18. And I have registered to speak Mr. David McKenny.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. My name is David McKinney. I'm a member of the Gerway Action Group and we're speaking against. It has long been understood that development on sites to the south of Otry would put undue pressure on the town's ancient road infrastructure. All traffic heading for the main arterial routes will have to pass through the narrow streets of the town centre, as will all associated construction traffic heading to and from the sites. So Otry 18 is no different. The site cannot adequately accommodate pedestrian traffic from the development without significant changes to the immediate road system, and it also takes no consideration of additional road traffic will contribute to the wider problems of the town. The west of the town, with its direct route to the A30 and beyond, provides opportunities that have far less negative impact. The site is clearly inappropriate in that the only advocates for development are those financially profiting from it, namely the landowners and their agent. It has been robustly and consistently challenged by all other parties, including the residents in unprecedented numbers, the town council, and even EDDC planning committee members refusing permission in the face of the tilted balance directive. That is definitive enough testament to its unsuitability. Should it have been granted permission under the pressure of the tilted balance, that would not be justification of its suitability, merely a poor planning decision based on external pressures. We're wasting an inordinate amount of taxpayers' time and money fighting inappropriate proposals for development based purely on financial gain and not the benefit of the town and the solution of its issues. It's always been understood and acknowledged that more appropriate housing is required, and this is an opportunity to take control away from developers and put it in the hands of councillors to make proactive and informed decisions that contribute to solving the town's capacity issues rather than adding it to them. The solution to land allocation for Otry St Mary lies to the west of the town, adjacent to Exeter Road. There is compromise to be found there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. McKenny. Councillor Granger.
Yeah, this is one we're all very familiar with. It's taken up a great deal of time over the years, a great deal of volunteers' time given freely. It's an inappropriate development. We've always opposed it. Half the town seems to oppose it. They're willing to sign petitions to that effect. East Devon has rejected it. It's gone to appeal. I hope that the appeal fails. And I commend your decision not to recommend it for allocation.
Thank you, Councillor Granger. Councillor Johns.
I'm sure we're all painfully aware of this site and how badly it is placed within Otry on the outskirts. Basically, if the site is approved, it would change the approach to Otry considerably from that aspect, which is basically a single width track, which has lots of farms down the end with large tractors and other vehicles that come through. To get any further down that road, you go through Wiggerton, which has lots of very historical listed buildings, which I am aware have been clipped on numerous occasions by large vehicles that can't quite judge how large they are. The site has already been put forward and turned down by East Devon District Council. So due to various reasons, including landscape, highway safety, flooding, loss of agricultural land, etc. And that has already been mentioned by the resident. The site is, again, it's the wrong end of town because any vehicles that come through have to go up Tip Hill and down the other, have to go up and then come down Tip Hill, a very narrow crossroads with very limited pavements. To be perfectly honest with you and being very frank in this meeting, the offer put forward as an appropriate pavement is an insult to Otry and its residents, and I think the site should be refused. Basically, the site that's been currently, the planning application that's currently come forward for there, the site has not been refused on Highways ground because Highways are happy to put an insufficient pavement from there, putting lives at risk, and I think it should be refused on all the grounds that it was currently refused on by East Devon District Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johns. Councillor Faithful.
I support the officer's recommendation to refuse.
Thank you, Councillor Faithful. And as we're coming into committee now, can I say that I also support the officer's recommendation to refuse, and I'm going to move from the chair that we move on from this site. Sorry, yes, Councillor Howe has a declaration to make.
Yes, my sister has actually bought a house just down the road from this. I believe it's an effects NRI. I don't believe she'd be seriously affected, apart from the obvious that all residents in that area would be, but for clarity.
Thank you, Councillor Howe. Councillor Hayward or Councillor Collins?
No, I was just going to propose that we moved on.
Okay, Councillor Hayward.
Thank you, Chair. I agree. It's just making an observation, and as we go through this, I'm listening to the speakers. On the basis of what's been said, you wouldn't have built Go Away Close. That's the truth of this. If you were comparing like for like, and I empathise entirely with what the previous speaker said about it's being done for profit and it's being done for money. Welcome to the world of planning, because for every person who says, "Oh, why is there too many second homes in this area?" someone sold that home to that person. So greed and avarice and even just capitalism is responsible for this, because East Devon hasn't gone out and demanded people put their land forward. We have a statutory duty to call for sites. This is what we have to do to make the local plan. And people have said, "Yeah, I've got a field. I'll throw it into the mix." That's the reality of the situation. So if landowners None of these, here, Axminster, Honiton, if not a single landowner had put their land forward, we wouldn't be in this situation. How we'd build the houses that we're asked to, I don't know. But this is the reality of the situation. So I support what you're saying, Chair, but again, it's that level of pragmatism. For every piece of land we're considering, someone has put it in front of us. Thank you.
Someone's put it in front of us and we have a statutory duty to consider it. Indeed. Councillor Ingham.
Thank you, Chair. It's been interesting this morning listening to different speakers and a number have outlined that all those sites put forward to the east are, no, and not to be considered. I got the feeling that those to the south of Otry are seemingly not to be considered. So perhaps we should have listened to Councillor Granger at 10:05 and allocated 1A and got on with the job. I hope that it's not NIMBYism that's led us to this, and I hope that's because people feel Otry 1A is the best site and not just a convenient place to allocate houses away from themselves. But we'll see how things progress this afternoon, Chair. Thank you.
We will indeed, Councillor Ingham. Any further comments on this site? No, in which case the proposal from the Chair is that we move on from Otry 18. All those members in favour, please. That's unanimous. Which brings us then to Otry 19, just round the corner, and we have Councillor Granger.
Otry Council supports the decision not to recommend this for allocation. And just by way of observation, 1A is looking better now, isn't it?
We have a wrap-up session for a reason, Councillor Granger. It may be that we need to ask that question again. Councillor Johns.
Hi. Otry 19, I would support the officer's recommendation to not allocate this site. But just a point of clarification, the Gerway site that was put forward was on a brown site. The site that you were talking about previously is a green site, just for clarification.
Councillor Faithfull, anything to add? I agree. Okay, good. Thank you very much. In this instance, so do I, and I'll propose from the Chair that we move on from this site. Any further comments from members? No, in which case, all those in favour of the proposal to move on, please. That's unanimous, which brings us then to Otry 21. And we have Ms. Samantha Thomas from Carney Sweeney on behalf of the landowner or developer.
Thank you, Chair, members. I say Samantha Thomas from Carney Sweeney Planning, and I'm here representing Wayne Homes, who are the developer who have an interest in the site. We would obviously support the position of Otry in the settlement hierarchy as being a location that can accommodate additional housing to meet both a local and a wider need and to support the town centre and existing facilities. We would also support that as providing a better balance of delivery across the district, which is something you have heard from me before. In terms of the site, we consider it's very well related to the town and is well placed, and there is a willing landowner and an interested developer who's very keen to bring an application forward, so it is fully deliverable and could be delivered reasonably quickly. In terms of a technical assessment, that is ongoing, but our initial highways advice has confirmed that we can provide an acceptable access to the site, not involving third-party land or impacting on the floodplain or the flood zone. And also we have the scope to provide the pedestrian and cycle connections that are referenced in the site assessment. I think in terms of other impacts, as I said, ongoing technical assessment, but we're confident those matters can be addressed through the detailed scheme, such as landscape with appropriate landscaping and buffers. And in terms of the wider impacts that we've heard today, obviously, through suitable conditions such as construction management and infrastructure, such as sort of contributions towards education. So we would obviously urge that members go with the officer recommendation to allocate the site. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Sweeney. Councillor Granger.
Unfortunately, as with land at Sidmouth Road that was previously mentioned, it's in the wrong part of town. Anything coming out of that site has got to go up Tip Hill, down into town, across the narrow crossroads. It's a rather optimistic plan, I think. There's a narrow track that would need to be a great deal of infrastructure adjustments to make this viable. And it's in a particularly beautiful meadow that runs down to into the Otter Valley. And the Town Council does not support this application.
Thank you, Councillor Granger. And apologies, Ms Thomas. I think I called you Ms Sweeney, reading the wrong bit of my paper. Councillor Johns.
Thank you. I'm afraid I also object to this. As the site is located on the valley floor, it would be visible from prominent ridges on each side of the valley. The site is bounded and crossed by hedgerows and trees, which may be of landscape importance. There are various PROWs crossing the site and in the wider landscape area, which may offer views of the site. The site is a significant greenfield site, parts of which are very constrained. It is very sensitive in heritage terms and visible in long-range views. Part of the site surrounded on two sides by existing development is less sensitive. Again, the concern would be, it's been discussed in here about the opportunity to introduce tree planting, to screen this, etc. That's obviously because of where it's sited. It has exactly the same issues as the previous site we mentioned. It comes out onto Sidmouth Road, which is exceptionally narrow. To get into the town itself, you have to go up the narrow road. Although technically it's supposed to be 2 vehicles wide, it isn't because of the pavement on the left-hand side jutting out if you're going up the road. When you get to Tip Hill at the top, which is obviously where the primary school children go, there is a lollipop person there. But the crossroads at the top, I don't know if all of the selection panels are aware of Otry. I know majority of you are. It's a very steep hill. You drop down the other side. The crossroads at the top is very narrow. It's also exceptionally busy. I would object to this site. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johns. Councillor Faithful.
Thank you, Chair. The images in the report for this site are actually for the larger site of GHED 29 rather than Otry 21. They are mainly for the area GHED 29B rather than 29A. There is no direct access to the site from the Sidmouth Road, as there is no clear access to the site in the report. It is difficult to make any clear comment. There are 2 possible access points, one from Claremont Fields and one from Gerway Close. But they both are dependent on who owns the landowner, who is the landowner for the strip of land between the ends of the adopted highway and the site boundary. The image of a metal gate is actually located quite a considerable distance from the site in question. I would like to therefore suggest that the committee move on from this site for this round of meetings and allow more information to be collated, in particular relating to accessing the site. I'm aware that a planning application for the farm access point was applied for set further down along the Sidmouth Road. The access point gave poor provision for pedestrians. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Faithful. Worth just clarifying for members that the issues with land ownership for an access, etc., would be for any potential planning applicant to address when bringing an application. Just because we make an allocation doesn't mean that it's guaranteed to come forward. If that issue couldn't be resolved, then it couldn't. obviously. We have to be satisfied that the site is deliverable to be allocating it lawfully. Having said that, though, could we get some clarity on what the access arrangements might be for this site, please?
Thank you, Chair. Well, as I understand, there are two potential options, as has been said, from Claremont Field and from Gerway Close. Not aware of a specific proposal from those putting it forward, but I think either of those options are potentially achievable, and Devon County Council, as the Highway Authority, are satisfied that the site is deliverable and a satisfactory access can be achieved.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. I have Councillor Jess Bailey.
Quite often I disagree with Devon County Council, but it's certainly not clear to me how this site is deliverable. And I think that, you know, if we're going to be considering allocating somewhere, I don't expect every last detail to be finalised, but I think it's just not clear either way, and particularly going through Claremont Field, what the third-party arrangements are. I'm also concerned that whichever way potential access is achieved, will bring vehicles and pedestrians to the substandard junction at Tip Hill, which is a cause for great concern, and I just don't feel that this site should be allocated. So I will leave it at that, but I won't be supporting its allocation. And I think in terms of Otry, why, you know, there's been so much house building, that's why we're left with sites. It might seem like, you know, people are objecting to all sites, but the problem is that there's already been 25% more than anywhere else, or more than any other town in the district in recent years. Thank you.
Yes, that is a typo, then yes, because we are on Otry 21. Good spot. Other members of committee? Sorry, Councillor Young, didn't see your hand. Hold it up high next time.
Yeah, I note in the opportunities in the notes that there's opportunity to link Gerway Close and Claremont Field by footpath and cycle path. Therefore, that's eliminating the problems of going down to the Sidmouth Road for cyclists and pedestrians. So it's got some pluses, and the officers do make this a recommendation. So I would propose to support the officer's recommendation on this one.
Thank you, Councillor Young. In this case, I'm going to second that one. I think the highways issue needs further investigation if this is to stay in the Regulation 19 version of the plan. But I think the other issues can be satisfactorily mitigated to some degree or another. The other point I would make, if we don't allocate this site, Otry will have 168 homes allocated in this plan period. And I appreciate it's taken a lot of growth, but given that we have to look at a new baseline, being what's there today for the emerging local plan. Mr. Freeman, how many dwellings are there in Otry? Did you have a number up earlier?
I did, Chair. Let me just find it. It was, 3,400 households in the ward, according to the 2021 census.
In the ward, so
that does include some of the rural periphery around.
Yeah,
I mean, even Telford and Metcombe. So,
yeah, even if we half that, if we didn't allocate this site, we'd be looking at less than 10% growth for a tier 3 settlement. I think, Mr. Dickens. Is Otry tier 3? It must be.
Yes, I think you're right.
Yes. Either way, I'm happy to second Councillor Young's proposal. I'm getting a quizzical look from Mr. Dickens about his own settlement hierarchy. Might be tier 2.
Apparently.
Yeah, it's in accordance with the other towns.
Okay.
There you go, tier 2.
With that ramble over then, any other members wish to speak? No? Okay. In which case then the proposal from Councillor Young, seconded by myself, is to allocate Otry 21. All those members in favour, please. I count 9. Those against? 2, and those abstaining? No one. Does that add up? I know we have lost Councillor Ingham. It does add up. Yes, very good. Okay. The good news is the front table can count. Excellent. So that is carried then, which brings us to GHED 29, as we've already done 27. Thank you, Mr. Dickens. And we have Councillor Granger.
I'll keep this brief for reasons previously stated. It's on the Sidmouth Road. It's unsustainable, and we don't support it. We agree that it shouldn't be recommended for allocation.
Thank you, Councillor Granger. Councillor Johns.
I also agree that the site should not be allocated.
Thank you, Councillor Johns. Councillor Faithful.
I just want to take an opportunity with this site to relate to the images. The metal gate that was referred to in the previous one and is on this one as well, is at the, if you look on the northern boundary, there's a V at the far left hand, and that is where the metal gate is. And the road access is actually on the, right on the corner of the Sidmouth Road. But I actually support the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Faithful. Members, Councillor Young.
I would recommend officer's recommendation.
Okay, the proposal is to move on. I did see Councillor Fernley's hand a minute ago. Are you seconding? Yeah. Okay. Any members wish to speak on this one? No? Okay, in which case the proposal from Councillor Young, seconded by Councillor Fernley, is to move on from GHED 29B. All those members in favour, please. That's unanimous. Which brings us then to GHED 31. Councillor Granger. I didn't have a 29A on my list. Is there a 29A? Mr. Dickens, can we go back a slide? Okay. Is that
right?
okay? Mr. Freeman's just advised me to ignore him, so I'm going to take that advice.
Wise move.
So GHED 31 then. Councillor Granger.
Thank you. From now on, actually, my view and the council's view is that we will support the officer's recommendations. And so for every one of these allocations, which are all no, that's going to be our attitude. And I'm late for a lunch appointment.
Thank you, Councillor Granger. Councillor Johns, Councillor Faithful, do you have anything to add to the officer recommendations on these?
No, I support the officer's recommendation. All of these state no for various reasons about the fact that they're unsuitable where the allocations are put forward. Councillor Faithful unfortunately has had to leave the room briefly. What I would say though, that I've noticed while I've been looking through these and I've been looking at other sites, etc., is the lack of consistency. It makes it very, very difficult as a ward member when we're reading something on ours that's almost identical to another site in another area of the district, and some are allocated and some aren't for exactly the same reason. It makes it exceptionally difficult. Perhaps in the future a template could be given out to officers when they go and assess these sites, so that at least then we're all reading from the same guidelines. It would make life a lot easier. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johns. Councillor Faithful, did you have anything to add on 31, 32, 33 or 34? Or indeed 35?
Yes, I have on others. This one, I would say I support the officer's recommendation to refuse on this one, but I'll just go back and look at my notes, but I have got other things to say.
Okay, please do have a look, because if you don't have anything to add, we could take them on block and save some time. However, in this case, while Councillor Faithful checks quickly, I will propose that we move on from GHED 31 from the chair. Do any members wish to speak? Okay, in which case the proposal is to move on from GHED 31. Those members in favour, please. That's unanimous. Councillor Faithful, GHED 32.
I support the officer's recommendation to refuse.
I move as chair that we move on from GHED 32. All those in favour, please. Okay, that's carried. So we move on from GHED 32. I do have 32 on my sheet, Ed. Are you, it's just, okay. GHED 33, Councillor Faithful.
This site has potential access from Chimeway Gardens. I would be grateful for information relating to highway capacity for this site. How many more houses could be added for the roadway available? Due to the angle of view from this site, from the East Devon National Landscape, I would consider this site to be offering less of a visual impact than sites on the west side of the valley and town.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Faithful. Do any members wish to speak on this site? No? Okay, in which case I will propose from the chair, in line with officer's recommendation, that we move on from GHED 33. All those members in favour, please. That's unanimous. GHED 34, Councillor Faithful.
This site has the potential to provide a link road from Alphington Road to Chimeway Hill to alleviate traffic, particularly when yonder street is closed. This would need to work with GHED 35.
It would indeed. Thank you, Councillor Faithful. Any members wish to speak? No? Okay, in which case I will propose from the chair that we move on from GHED 34. All those members in favour, please. That's unanimous. GHED 35, Councillor Faithful.
My understanding of this site is that it was offered along with other sections of land to provide sports provision and part of a link road through to Chimeway Road. Alongside this was off-road parking for residents along North Street. I would therefore like to know why, when land is offered for one thing, it is added to the assessment process for other things, usually for housing. Having sat through the 3 previous meetings, I am quite surprised how often this has happened. When local landowners are making an effort to support the local community, it is very disappointing to see their offers ignored and brushed to one side. Under the present circumstances, I support the officer's recommendation, but not necessarily for the reasons they have given. I would therefore like to see a future review of the proposals, including rejected sites, to check whether what the sites were listed for is actually what they were put forward for.
Thank you, Councillor Faithful. I'm going to come to Mr. Freeman just to clarify what's gone on there.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I mean, I think this site and the other sites around this kind of north-eastern edge of the town were put forward together, and there was some suggestion about creating a kind of link road around that quartile of the town and offering potential benefits in terms of open space and sports provision. As members will note from previous meetings, what we've considered is the housing component of those proposals. We can only consider provision of open space, sports pitches, etc., where it's commensurate with what is needed to support the development coming forward. So we can't consider those wider benefits. And in any event, I think our conclusions remain the same in terms of the landscape impact, the highways impact. I think there's issues with the northern part, some of which was sifted out as well in terms of the impact on heritage assets as well. So for various reasons, those proposals wouldn't have been acceptable. But what's before you is the elements that we should be considering through this process.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. Do any members wish to speak on this site? No, in which case I will propose from the chair that we move on from GHED 35. All those members in favour, please. That's unanimous. Okay, we are going to push on through Tipton, and then, as there's only 3 sites in there, and then we will break for lunch, members. So without any further ado then, Otry 04, and I have first up a statement from the landowners. Debbie.
Thank you, Chair. Let me just check I've got the right one. So this is, I'll read the statement as follows, Chairs. On behalf of the landowners of Otry 04, I support the officer's recommendation. The primary issue facing the village, I would argue, is the need to move the school out of the area of flood risk. There is a great deal of support to find a site that retains the school in the village and a great deal of opposition to removing the school from the village. The landowners have made this land available in previous representations to Regulation 18 Local Plan and also in respect of the current and ongoing site assessment process being undertaken by Devon County Council and the school governors. With regard to car access, previous advice from Devon County Council on a previous refusal offered no objection to the access. The site was previously a second choice allocation for housing. Given the ongoing exercise regarding retaining the school in the village, the landowners support the proposed identification for a school with some self-build housing. If, however, the school is retained in the village on another site as part of the current process being undertaken by the school governors, I would suggest that a cascade mechanism could be replaced in Regulation 19 policy where the site is identified as a residential allocation. In short, we support the report before committee in respect of this land, subject to this proposed slight amendment. So that is from Neil Gillings, and that's on behalf of the landowners. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Debbie. Worth highlighting, as the report states, were Tipton to lose the school, it would lose its Tier 4 status and therefore it would not be appropriate for an independent housing allocation. So just for members to bear in mind there. With that said, Councillor Granger. Oh, he's run away. Okay, Councillor Johns.
I would support the landowner and the officer's report with reference to an allocation for the school and for 5 self-build dwellings on this site. Tipton needs a school in Tipton. A relocated school to Otry, for any other name, is a new school for Otry, regardless of whether it's relocated. I strongly advocate for this school to be built on this site in Tipton with the 5 self-build dwellings. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johns. Councillor Faithful.
This site abuts the main Otry to Sidmouth Road, which historically was the B3176. This road continues to carry considerable amounts of traffic, with no pedestrian footway along its length. There is very high likelihood that parents will park in the immediate vicinity of the school and likely onto the Sidmouth Road. The development of this site would need to include the closing off of the side lane. I do not consider placing a primary school directly onto such a busy road to be a sound proposal. To the north of the proposed access point is a deep cutting, severely limiting visibility. While this is the only site put forward by Devon County Council, it is not the only possible site in Tipton. Each of the various sites in Tipton have room for small housing to go alongside a new school. With or without a 30-mile-an-hour speed limit, cars are still likely to travel excessively due to the steep downhill section of the road and the steep uphill section opposite. With regard to the proposal for 45 houses, the extra houses will only be justified if the school remains in Tipton. If the school is to be relocated to Thorn Farm site, there is no justification. Closing off the side lane will mean that disabled access to the site and Otter Close. I feel that this site is excessive for the community like Tipton St John.
Thank you, Councillor Faithful. I must say, in this instance, I'm in complete agreement with the officer recommendation that the school should be staying in Tipton and it should go on this site with 5 self-built houses. And therefore, I'm going to propose from the chair that the site is allocated for the school and 5 self-built dwellings. Councillor Jess Bailey.
Thank you. So obviously I'm the Devon County Councillor, and there are other sites around, but this is the one that's been brought forward, not by Devon County Council. I just want to clarify that as a result of comment made by Councillor Faithful. But I think what is really important is that we scrap any reference to 45 houses, because I'm concerned that potentially that may lead to the owner preferring 45 houses. And I think, given that there's no other sites in this process that are identified at this stage, if the school doesn't go there, then it will, as you say, lose its Tier 4 status. So can I ask that any reference to those 45 houses is removed? Thank you.
Yeah, I would clarify my proposal does not have a fallback position in it. Councillor Young, I saw your hand first, and then Councillors Bethany Collins and Fernley.
The recommendation says the site should be considered for a school. I would like to take out the should be considered and put the site should be for a school, not just a consideration. Make it more.
Just to be absolutely clear, I'm proposing that this site is allocated for a school and for 5 self-built dwellings, not for anything else. That is the policy allocation I'm proposing.
Yeah.
Councillor Fernley? No? Okay, nothing to add. Any further comments from members? No? Okay, in which case the proposal is to allocate the site for school and 5 self-built dwellings from the chair. All those members in favour, please. That is unanimous, and perhaps we could give Devon County Council a nudge that they've now got a site allocated so they could get on with building that school. With that said, site Otry 06. Councillor Granger has run away, so Councillor Johns.
On this site and the next one, I agree with the officer's recommendation.
Okay, Councillor Johns, for the benefit of the tape, agrees with the officer's recommendation on both of these. Councillor Faithful.
Although this site is technically within the East Devon National Landscape, the boundary is the roadside is the road the site is set on. I do not feel that the impact that would be created by having a small development on this scale would have any real harm to that landscape. As the site can only be used for roadside section, I would expect any development to be an extension of the houses at Coombe Cross.
Thank you, Councillor Faithful. Do any members wish to speak? No? Okay, in which case I'll propose from the chair that we move on from Otry 06. All those members in favour, please. That's unanimous. Which brings us to the last site for, I can't really call it this morning session anymore, but Otry 22. Councillor Faithful.
I do not feel that development on the corner will have sufficient impact to make the visual harm unmanageable. Reduced roof height and tree screening can help to reduce the visual impact of this site.
Thank you, Councillor Faithful. Do any members wish to speak? No, in which case I will propose the officer's recommendation from the chair, which is to move on from this site. All those members in favour, please. Okay, that's carried unanimously. In which case then we will finish there for the morning session. I would say, just for members' benefit, if we don't finish today, then by 6 o'clock, then we will adjourn today's meeting and pick it up on the 1st of October, which I had told members wouldn't have a meeting, but it looks like we may need it after all. So with that then, we'll reconvene committee at 2 o'clock.